everyone, and welcome to Science Storytime. Dr. Misty here. I'm so excited you could join me today. For today's story, we are going to be reading the book Fearless Flyer, Ruth Law and Her Flying Machine, which was written by Heather Lang and illustrated by Raul Colon. Before we get started, I want to say a special thank you to Boyds, Mills, and Kane Publishing for allowing educators to read their stories online. So let's jump right in. Fearless Flyer, Ruth Law and Her Flying Machine. When I was a little girl, I used to dream of flying, not with terror, but with wonder and delight. I would be a swallow flying south or an eagle swooping down from the clouds, and then all of a sudden I'd wake up just a little girl ready to cry because she had no wings. Ruth Law. The higher I soar, the greater freedom and liberty I feel. The loop, the spiral dive, the dip of death. Ruth loved to entertain folks with her daredevil tricks, but after 4 years of flying in circles, Ruth longed to fly to get somewhere far away. She made up her mind to fly from Chicago to New York City. When Ruth Law made up her mind, there was no use trying to stop her. And here's Ruth Law's plane. It has her name, Ruth Law. And this is an illustration of her doing all of her tricks. Few aviators dared to fly cross-country in their flimsy flying machines. If an engine had trouble, by the time the aviator realized it, there was often nowhere to land. Ruth had a secret weapon. She knew every nut and bolt on her machine. I could anticipate what would happen to the motor by the sound of it. But Ruth also had a problem. She had never flown more than 25 miles. Her little biplane, built by airplane pioneer Glenn Curtiss, held only 16 gallons of gasoline. And here's an illustration of Ruth. And then this was her biplane here, behind her. Ruth asked Mr. Curtiss to sell her his latest flying machine. Victor Karlstrom had just flown it 452 miles from Chicago to Erie, Pennsylvania, a new American record for nonstop flight. The huge plane had a partly enclosed cockpit and held 205 gallons of gasoline, enough to fly from Chicago to New York City without stopping. But Ruth couldn't convince Mr. Curtiss. He worried she couldn't handle the powerful machine on such a long flight. That didn't stop Ruth Law. Her little biplane would do just fine with a few adjustments. She added 3 extra gas tanks. Now the plane held 53 gallons. She installed a metal guard to protect her feet and legs from the frigid wind. She charted her course, marking the mountains and hills in red ink and outlining the rivers in blue. She cut the map into strips and attached them together on a roller. Aviation experts thought the flight was doomed. Impossible! What those men can do, a woman can do. I can do. And so this is Ruth Law's plane after she's made these adjustments, where she's enclosed the cockpit partially. At 4 o'clock in the morning on November 19, 1916, Ruth dressed in 4 flying suits and a skirt. The wind whipped from Lake Michigan over Grant Park at 50 miles per hour. Her mechanics begged her to wait until the weather improved, but Ruth had made up her mind. The wind would give her the extra speed she needed to get to New York City without stopping. And so here is Ruth dressed for her flight, getting into the cockpit of her plane. She took off her skirt and tucked it behind her seat. There was no need to look like a lady up where she was going. She pulled down her goggles. Ruth was a little scared. I wouldn't give a cent for any experience that didn't scare me a little. The scare is part of the thrill. At 8:25 a.m. Eastern Time, she was off. Ruth bumped along faster, faster. She pulled the left lever back to raise the elevators. Her machine lifted up, up, up. The gusty wind tossed her right, left, up, down. To become an aviator, one has to dismiss all fear. Slowly, she gained altitude. As quickly as the wind had gusted, it vanished. Would she have enough gasoline? Ruth held on to the left and right levers at all times. One wrong move would send her tumbling from the sky. Holding the right lever with her knee, she turned the knobs on the map box strapped to her leg. I had a tremendous feeling of freedom, of exhilaration, of power. I was steering my own course by a little 6-inch map. And so this is Ruth flying over some farms in between Chicago and New York City. Dipping under clouds, Ruth hunted for landmarks, molehill mountains, patchwork villages, lakes shining like silver dollars. Each point I passed and recognized just made my heart leap. Over Cleveland, Ohio, she checked the oil gauge. 0 pressure. Something was wrong. So this is Ruth ducking down below the clouds in order to see the land that she's flying over, to see any of those markers that she had marked on her map, those landmarks. Should she try to land? Ruth listened to the sound of her motor. No clicks, no putts. Ruth knew her motor. It purred perfectly. So she kept flying. The icy cold pecked through her suits. She checked the next compass coordinates on the cuff of her glove. Erie, Pennsylvania, where Karlstrom had landed. I was so excited that I hardly felt the gripping pains going through my body on account of the cold. So here's Ruth flying, and she's now made it past the record, the most recent record. Steering past Erie, Ruth knew she had broken Karlstrom's record. But Ruth's excitement fizzled as the gas level dropped. If she could just make it to Hornell, New York, she could land on the racetrack. 10 miles away, her motor sputtered. Ruth looked desperately for a place to land. There was still gas in the tanks, but it was too low to feed into the engine. 2 miles from Hornell, the engine grumbled its last roar, leaving her with nothing but the silence of the wind. When your engine suddenly stops while you're 2,000 feet in the air, it's some comfort to know that if anything can be done, you can do it. Ruth threw the lever forward and glided. At 2:10 p.m., she touched down in Hornell. She had flown 512 miles, the new American non-stop record. But Ruth's journey wasn't over. Ruth Law had made up her mind to fly to New York City, and there was no use trying to stop her. And so this is Ruth gliding in to land in Hornell. And she just made the new American nonstop record, which is amazing. After refueling her plane and filling her stomach, she took off for New York City. A high hilltop with tall trees loomed in front of her. Ruth tried to climb, but the gas weighed her down. The trees grew closer, taller. She steepened her path. Branches clawed at the plane. She held on tight until all she heard was the soothing hum of the motor. I came as near being wrecked as I ever want to be. So this is Ruth flying over those trees, and you can see they've illustrated how the trees are grabbing onto the bottom of her plane as she just barely makes it over the top of them. Word had spread about Ruth Law. People along her flight path scanned the skies for the bird woman perched on the front of her flying machine. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky. Ruth squinted. She could barely read her compass. If only she had a light. New York City would have to wait until tomorrow. Heavy with disappointment, Ruth landed in Binghamton, New York. And so here are the people who have gathered to cheer Ruth on, and you can see her flying at the front of her biplane. In the morning, a big crowd cheered as she took off. Soon, a thick fog engulfed her. It tricked her, heading rivers, erasing landmarks. Where was she? I couldn't see a mile in front of me, and that is considered dangerous in flying. She flew lower, lower, coasting up hills and down into valleys, looking for landmarks, using precious gas. At last, Port Jervis, New York. She reset her compass course. Finally, the tip of Manhattan appeared. The motor began to cut out. She climbed higher, higher. Gliding, Ruth circled around the Statue of Liberty toward Governor's Island. She smiled at me when I went past. She did. I think we both feel alike about things. And so this is Ruth Law gliding and circling around the Statue of Liberty as she came into New York City. Ruth swooped over the seawall and landed with 2 long hops straight toward a welcoming band. She pushed down hard on the brake pedal. The plane slowed and stopped. And here's the band and Ruth coming in for a landing. Numb with cold, Ruth didn't move at first. Then she took off her gloves and leather helmet. Icicles dangled from her hair. She smiled at the cheering crowd. At that moment, Ruth realized she had done something more important than breaking a nonstop record. The sky was my limit and the horizon my sphere. It's any woman's sphere if she has nerve and courage and faith in herself. She's got to have faith in herself. I hope you enjoyed our story today all about Ruth Law and her record-breaking trip from Chicago all the way to New York City. Be sure to check out our activity video where we're going to learn how to make our own paper airplanes, just like this one. And we're going to learn how to make a paper airplane launcher so that you can fly your own plane. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!